Ladies and gentlemen, the world is in crisis. The US presidential elections got in the news again this week with new polls showing that Republican voters are turning away from Donald Trump, the guy who's become famous for shouting absolute nonsense. Instead, leading the race is a Dr. Ben Carson, who says just as much wacky stuff, but murmurs it quietly instead. We've been horrified by the terrorist attacks in Paris, and no doubt many of us have taken to social media recently to express our outrage and our solidarity with the victims. It was great to see so many people speaking out about racism, although I'm not sure that the suggestion to #ban the haka is really our top priority. No, seriously, the world faces some extraordinary challenges, but we're also presented with some amazing opportunities. For the last 3 years, I've been really interested in the idea of democracy, or how we govern our society and respond to these sorts of challenges, from the critical, like terrorism or climate change, through to the self-inflicted and extravagant, like the flag referenda. It's been fascinating working with the Christchurch Youth Council because we don't learn any of this sort of stuff at school. And in fact, most of us won't go on and study it at university, and I haven't studied any of this stuff either. Yet. I'm just a teenager with a bit of interest and a little bit of experience in this area, an interest and an experience that I'm really keen to share with you today. So, let's start with what democracy is not. Democracy is not just about voting, and I think this is a really critical fact for those of us who are under 18. We can't vote yet, but our voice still counts. People in government still have to listen to us. Similarly, between elections, if the government or the city council go off and do whatever they want to do and ignore the voice of the people, that's not democracy either. That's an elected dictatorship. Secondly, democracy is not just a popularity contest. Hearing about the Republicans in the US and one of the ridiculous things that their joke candidates have said is all very entertaining, but it's not how it's meant to work. We should be picking our leaders on more important things than whether we like their hair or their families, but rather on whether they're actually going to do a good job or not. I think it's easy for us to say that these are all issues for other countries, but we have to remember that New Zealand is a long way short of a perfect democratic nation. Okay, we're not half as bad as certain regimes where if you speak out against the exalted leader, that may be the last thing you ever say. But in my opinion, we're getting closer to that. And here are 3 reasons why. The most important thing about democracy is participation. People have got to be involved in the decisions that concern them. But for various reasons, a vast number of New Zealanders aren't getting involved. Look at the last elections. Back in 2014, 700,000 New Zealanders could have voted, but chose not to. And it really wasn't all that difficult. The average length of time taken to cast your vote was less than 5 minutes in comparison to many countries where you may have to queue for hours. Young New Zealanders were particularly badly represented in these statistics. 19% of young people weren't even signed up for the election, and another slightly more than 20% could have just strolled in off the streets, but couldn't be bothered or chose not to. And I think if you look at the support that the elderly get with their Super Gold card, I mean, they get free bus rides during most of the day and discounts off a whole range of stores, from Noel Leeming to holidays in the Cook Islands. Tell me that it's a coincidence that older people are really involved in the democratic process. They turn out to the community meetings, they turn out to vote. If more young people were more involved, then the people in the positions of power would have to listen to us. One of the biggest barriers to people being involved is understanding. Raise your hand and wave it around if you've been to a community board meeting. A few? Yeah, not that many. Who can tell me precisely what community boards do? Yeah, I think you see the problem. And it's not our fault. We don't learn about this stuff, and we're all busy with 101 other things in our lives. We tend to leave the running of the country to someone else. But then look what happens. The people who are in the positions of power are setting up barriers just as quickly as groups like the Youth Council are trying to tear them down. If you make the meetings long and boring and the language confusing, then seems no one cares. A really easy barrier is language. I was at a public meeting earlier this year, and all the talk was about levers, which I thought were these things that you might find, in the cockpit of a plane, or maybe it's that bit of metal that you use to take a tyre off. No, it turns these people meant financial levers, which is something else entirely. Apparently, they're actions that could be taken to balance a budget. Who would have known? Another really frustrating way of keeping people out of knowing what's going on is to make the meetings be at really inconvenient times and make them really long and really boring. And I think that suits the people who are the professionals, who that's their job, but it's absolutely useless for those of us who've got school or uni or work. We need to go back and remember what democracy is all about. That's everyone having a say in the decisions that concern them. And therefore, if you want to kick up a fuss about something, that's your right and no one can take that away from you. It's your right to have things explained to you in a language that you can understand. And it's your right to be able to have your say without having to give up too much time from other commitments. These are your rights. It's also your right to be able to disagree with people and to be respected for doing so. I think it's useful at this point in time to check that there are some things that you cannot disagree with, and they're called facts. For instance, you cannot disagree that climate change is happening, that it's a problem, and that humans are the main cause. It's not up for grabs. I'm glad to see that everyone agrees, but I actually don't care whether you agree because it's a fact. It's just like whether cats are furry. But how we respond to climate change, or whether we should cut down that tree at the end of your road, or whether there's enough money going into skin cancer prevention, these are some of the things that we can have a conversation about. Except New Zealand isn't terribly good at having a conversation about things. Unfortunately, the Kiwi way tends to be that if you disagree with someone, well, then they must be an idiot. I mean, look at the New Zealand government, for example. That wasn't a joke. Just this last week, a new report came out of Treasury, that collection of some of New Zealand's leading economists and accountants. And they said that the promised anchor projects in the city centre, the convention centre, the stadium, were probably a bit unrealistic. And as soon as the report came out, the politicians were ready, playing the blame game, saying, what did Treasury know? Oh, those blimmin' Wellington bureaucrats, and as usual, passing the buck to someone else. And it's not just the politicians or the government. We all do it. Our television personalities are expert at it. Bloody hippies, they'll say, if anyone ever brings up an environmental issue. In fact, I think we've all got friends who can be prone to launching attacks on you if you disagree with them. And we must make sure that we do not become a country full of these sorts of people. So the third thing that we need in a functioning democracy is to have respectful dissent or disagreement. In summary, democracy is participation, it's understanding, and it's respectful disagreement. Yeah? I think this makes sense, and the good thing is that you can be involved in changing the culture on each of these fronts. Because in New Zealand, while yes, technically we can vote, in these three regards, we're a good way short of perfect. What about the rest of the world? What opportunities are there for new and exciting democratic ways of doing things? Look at Iceland, for example. Not just a pretty country in the North Atlantic Ocean, but a really exciting example of how you can do things differently. Back in 2008, Iceland suffered really badly in the global financial crisis. Its banks collapsed and unemployment skyrocketed. The Icelandic government, which in their language is called the Thing, realised that they needed a new solution. And so they pulled together a large group of young people from all different walks of life who had never been part of any sort of political party before. And they said, go away and write us a constitution. Tell us what's most important. And that they did. And thanks to that document, Iceland is now back on its feet. Look at the Arab Spring. In 2011, people in Northern Africa and the Middle East started using Facebook and Twitter to communicate, to organise protests, and to bring down their dictatorships. Okay, this was a disaster in some places, but look at Tunisia, where they brought down their dictator and set up a really functioning democracy. I think it goes to show that it can be done. And here in New Zealand, we've got the same tools, but slightly different challenges. In the past, young people were absolutely integral in bringing down dictatorships from Eastern Europe to South America. Today in New Zealand, life is pretty comfortable for many of us, but there are still things to be concerned about. One of those really important obstacles to overcome is to make sure that everyone can be involved in the decisions that concern our country, and that requires participation. Often it's not easy, and so we need to break down the barriers that prevent people being involved. Finally, we need to make sure that we understand that it's okay to have different opinions, and we need to work together to make Aotearoa New Zealand the clean, green, smart, safe and friendly place that we're meant to be.